matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to Doomed to Fail, the podcast where we switch up the premise of the show unexpectedly, as is what I'll be doing later today. I'm Farz, joined here by my co-host, Taylor. Hi, Taylor.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. Are we recording at the normal time?
We are. It is the morning. It's very bright in your office. That's delightful. I at work this week, I was like 8:30 meetings are really rough for me because I don't like the mornings. Like the mornings are dumb. I hate them. I will never wake up early, but I do get up early for this. So I guess it's just perspective.
And I did not change the timing on this at all, or the day, or anything. So
Woohoo.
kudos to me.
Congratulations. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and start by discussing what you would like to be drinking today, or will be drinking.
Cool. So I know for your story, I don't know what it is yet, but for your story, we'll be reminding everybody to hydrate and just drinking water. So make sure to have your water. I have my water and my coffee. Farz has his water and his Diet Coke, so we're ready to go. And then for my story that I'll jump into first is I have a quote from one of our subjects or participants or whatever, and it is, "Alcohol taken in sufficient quantities may produce all the effects of drunkenness." So
Who would have
it's just
thought?
like a posh drinking some drinks is what is the drink in general, because today I'm going to talk about Oscar Wilde and his boyfriend, Lord Alfred Douglas, who goes by the name Bosie. So
Lovely.
tell you more about their story.
I
So-
do not know very much about Oscar Wilde. So if you ask me about movies that he was in, I probably won't know them.
Well, he was in no movies because he's a playwright from the 1800s.
I mean, like movies about him, obviously.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I knew that much at least.
We'll get to it. I think there's some that you might recognize if maybe you haven't read or seen. So we'll get there. I did a lot of research this week, just like watching movies, like you said, and listening to some podcasts. I watched a documentary called The Importance of Being Oscar from the BBC. I watched the film Wilde. It's from the 90s about Oscar Wilde. Stephen Fry plays him, and Jude Law actually plays Lord Alfred Douglas. And this is the second movie that we've brought up where Jude Law plays like the young gay lover of an older man.
What was
He
the
also
first?
did in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Oh, okay.
So that was Jude Law's kind of genre, 20 years ago or so. I also listened to a great Oxford lecture that I found. It's by a woman named Dr. Sauce Eltis. Her name's SOS. I have no idea how to pronounce that, but Oxford University records their lectures and you can just listen to them as a podcast. So the audio was pretty terrible because I think it was like just a microphone like pinned to her while she was actually doing her class. And one of the episodes, I think she had like a brooch on or something. You could like hear it hitting the brooch, and someone was coughing the entire time. So you're like, oh my God, go home. Do not cough for this entire lecture. But still, it was delightful. And I learned a lot.
So how many movies and books and podcasts in total were part of your research?
I watched 2 movies and listened to about 5 hours of a podcast.
Thorough.
Thank you.
Very thorough.
Yes, it's been a very posh week for me.
I know, you're
It's
listening to Oxford lectures. Like you're like elevating us a little bit.
Yeah, it's been difficult not to speak in an English accent to my family and friends, so I will try to not do that as well here, but I've been listening to it a lot.
You don't want to try to do the whole your section in a British accent?
No, I don't think I'm ready for that.
Okay.
Maybe next time.
Yes.
So, this story appeals to me the way that the Eleanor Roosevelt story did when we talk about living a full life and really living the shit out of your life. In this story, Oscar Wilde lived a rich life. I say the word velvet a lot. It reminds me of this idea of like waking up late because I hate the mornings and being an artist and throwing a fit and writing all your feelings and then eating a great meal and staying up late, drinking and talking and smoking and then yelling about art and the meaning of life and then doing it all again. So just like this idea that you're just like in this world of just like artists and art, and you're writing poetry and you're writing these plays and things like that. And it seems like, really fun to be able to choose what you want to do, even though like he did have obviously working as a writer. And I also feel like I have context to what this looks like because we're in like the late 1800s and like the Victorian era. And I know what that looks like. Like that's kind of an aesthetic that I like. I want to paint all my walls black and like, um, have that look, going on in my own home. So it's something that I can really see. And I feel like that I couldn't really see everything in the Taj Mahal story because I just like don't know what day-to-day life was like then. But I feel like I know what day-to-day life was for this. So I feel like it's easier for me to talk about, if that makes sense.
I keep picturing Hogwarts,
Yeah, picture
like
Hogwarts.
libraries with like rich oak and stuff like that.
Exactly. That you can totally picture Hogwarts or doing this. So it's very posh. Everything we're talking about is very, very posh. So I'm going to talk about the people, some of the stories they told, some of the things that they wrote, and then the bad things that happened to them. So there are a couple of bad things do happen to the people in this story. So Oscar Wilde was born, and this is actually where I thought maybe I could flip into an Irish accent, but I'm not. Maybe I maybe won't. But his name was Oscar Finnegal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. Oh, I don't know. It's a lot. It's very Irish. He was born in Dublin on the 16th of October, 1854. His parents were super interested in keeping him educated. He had like a tutor until he was, pretty grown, and then he went to Trinity College in Dublin, and then he went to Oxford. So to cut to the chase and kind of spoil the story, another quote from Oscar Wilde is, "The two great turning points in my life were when my father sent me to Oxford and when society sent me to prison." So it's a big turning point in his life when he gets to go over to England, go to Oxford. He's a little bit of an outcast in the UK because he's Irish, but he gets along and he's fine. While in school at Oxford and at Trinity College, he's already making waves as a poet. So he was known for being lavish in like the right way, a lot of velvet, decorating his rooms with peacock feathers. He held lavish parties. He dated a woman who ended up leaving him for Bram Stoker, which is fun.
That's pretty. I mean, if you're gonna get left for anyone, that's okay. I could live
I
with
know.
that.
I know. So kind of delightful. And so he's like, here's what I'm thinking. And this is just me, trying to learn in 7 hours this week what people study their whole lives. But he's like, my impression of Oscar Wilde is that he is half posh. So he's for this time when he's in college and the rest of his life, he's going to be part of like the poshest and most fancy part of the British society. And that's what all of his plays are about. His plays and poetry are funny, and posh people thought they were funny too. So it was like making fun of them without them knowing. And I think that is the key to like ingraining yourself into like a really rich, posh group. He can get in and use their things, and go to their summer houses and take the clever things, but leave the boring ones. And I think that's kind of something that he was able to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Like you're kind of describing Philip Seymour Hoffman in
Yeah.
the oh god, I forgot his name. Truman Capote movie
Mm-hmm.
that he did,
Mm-hmm.
where he just kind of can find his way to mingle in different high culture and counterculture groups and fit in wherever he wants to.
Yeah, I would say that Oscar Wilde's a little more like personable than Truman Capote, but yes, it's like the same idea. That makes sense. And I definitely feel this way too. Like I know people in my life who are like very, rich and, went to Harvard and, all that. And I don't really fit in with them. You can tell that I don't fit in with them, even though I like try to, and I'm not like any worse than they are. I just isn't the same. And I feel like I can tell when someone's like a real old money that like we're different.
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine if we were to hang out with the Kennedys, we'd stand
Right.
out.
Exactly. They'd know.
Yeah,
So exactly. But he's in there. He's already, writing, and he's making money, and he kind of already becomes a caricature of himself. There's a lot of cartoons, like comics of him, like drawings and like papers and things, which is I guess because they weren't like publishing photographs so in the papers, so they used to draw people, but a lot of like exaggerated cartoons of him. He had this like long brown hair. He was very tall, and he had this like these full lips and this long face, and so he's easy to draw, and to like characterize. Are you looking him up?
yeah, I am.
Okay, good.
I was actually looking
So
up his IQ first, and then I couldn't find anything because they don't
that's
have IQ
hilarious.
tests back then. Yeah, he kind of looks like Snape.
A little bit. Wow, you're real going full Hogwarts. I like it.
So there's
He has
a
Snape hair.
the new Hogwarts game was just
Hmm.
released yesterday. It's called, or sorry, the Harry Potter game is called Hogwarts Legacy, and I've
Hmm.
been watching the gameplay, and I'm like, I'm definitely gonna get it. It just hasn't dropped for Xbox One yet, so I don't know. I'll probably cut this out because it's totally irrelevant to anything. But that's why I'm thinking about Harry Potter so much.
No, totally. Yeah, I heard about it too. I heard that it was coming out, so I hope it's fun. It sounds fun.
I think it will be.
So, yeah, so you can continue to think he kind of looks like Snape, a little kinder, I imagine. Kinder eyes than Snape's eyes, but looks a little bit like Snape with that hair. And there's already, a play that's written that's sort of a satire of him, and he gets invited to come to America to promote it. So he's like part of the zeitgeist. So he travels to America to promote this play and then ends up going back to the UK and just continues to be a writer. Okay. Anyway, during this time, after college, while he's like in his 20s, he marries a woman named Constance Lloyd in 1884. And they have two sons, and he continues to like write and hang out. So it sounds like him and Constance loved each other. They had their two kids, they took good care of them, they took good care of each other. Unfortunately, the problem with their marriage was that Oscar Wilde is gay. He was gay. He wasn't going to be, happy in a marriage because to a woman because he was a gay man. And so he
But she,
starts
but
to,
she knew, right? Like she knew that she was the beard.
I don't know if she knew.
Okay.
She found out later, obviously, but immediately I don't think that she knew. That wasn't like the deal. The
Right.
deal,
Okay.
yeah, it wasn't like let's get married and you can do whatever you want. It was like let's get married because I love you and let's have a family. And then he just couldn't continue that.
Yep. That's rough.
Yeah. So a couple friends of his, one friend that will mention briefly is a friend named Robbie Ross, and he was played by Michael Sheen in the movie, in the Wilde movie, and he did a great job. And this was his first physical relationship with a man. So he's someone who will be in his life kind of on and off forever, but he does have a couple like relationships with men sort of to start, but Robbie Ross was his first. And he was a Canadian man who was in the UK. He inherited a lot of money and so just was able to like kind of hang out and be a part of Oscar Wilde's life. So I know I did an agenda at the beginning of this or whatever, laid out what we were going to talk about, but I want to talk about Oscar's work and him as like a man in this time and in general. So some of the things that are famous that you may have heard of is the importance of being earnest. Have you seen that, heard that,
It,
read that?
is that a
It's a
book
play.
or it's
Is
a
it,
play?
it
No, I
yeah.
haven't.
A book is The Portrait of Dorian Gray. Do you remember that one?
That I do. Yeah.
Okay. So there's that. He did a couple other, I mean, he did a ton of stuff, but some of the other famous ones are Lady Windermere's Fan, Salome, and A Woman of No Importance. Those are some of the big ones. The Portrait of Dorian Gray, if read through it with a, a lens, you can see it as like a homosexual love story between an older man and a younger man. So in the Portrait of Dorian Gray, this man paints a painting of Dorian Gray, and the painting continues to get older and more decrepit as Dorian does, bad things and lives his life, but he doesn't get older. So that's the basic of that story. So some of the themes from Oscar Wilde's work, and this is what I was getting from that lecture, that Oxford lecture, is not judging people because a theme of the time was judging fallen women. Everyone loved that. This woman is pregnant out of wedlock. This woman, is leaving her husband, and people loved to see those kind of like melodramatic tragedies on stage. And he really wanted to flip it and say, judgments are a form of control. I think we've talked about that before with like marriage being a form of control
Yeah.
and things like that. So judging women or anyone in that way is a way of controlling them. And so he wants to challenge that in his work. So in his work, one thing the characters do that they're allowed to do is change. And a big tenet of Oscar Wilde's life is you can be something different in each moment, and that's okay. And people don't let people judge you because you're constantly changing and constantly evolving. And one of his things that he also said was the most fundamental human right is to be an individual. So that means there's no truth to who you are because you're always changing, but that's also a good thing. That's part of his tenet.
It's very cool. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I want to think about Oscar Wilde as like he's like indulgence. He's, writing these plays. He gets kind of fat. He spends his money on fancy things. So that's fun. Good for him. And this is a time where being gay is illegal. So, like we talked about before, there's always been gay people. and it goes, in and out of legality, but right now it's actually illegal to be gay in the UK. And if I was talking about this for like days and days, I would talk more about there's like these like young men sex workers called rent boys, and it's exactly what you sound like, you can, do that. In the movie Wilde, one of them is played by Orlando Bloom. He's in there for like 4 seconds. It was his first movie, but he just kind of like winks at Oscar Wilde and like walks away. So it's a little like flirtation thing. That's quite cute. So there's secret places for gay men to get together. If you want to know, if you want to be a gay man, it's easy. It's plenty, it's available. It's just like not, technically allowed. And so that means a lot of challenges for Oscar Wilde and people at this time, a lot of persecution, a lot of stigma. And he, used his writing to start to challenge some of those societal norms and express love like in different ways. Okay. So that's a little bit about his writing, about like who he is as a person. So we're still in Hogwarts. He looks like Snape. Very lush, very posh. So just to kind of tie up Constance, so poor Constance, she does die later in this story, so we won't come back to her, but but their relationship isn't the one that was doomed to fail. Like, even though like, it was, but like that's not what I'm talking about in this story. But like, of course, that was never going to work out because he was gay. They never got divorced, but she did end up passing away really young. She was only 40. She probably had MS, but they didn't know what that was then. So she just had, a lot of pain, and they did all these surgeries to figure it out. But like surgery in 1890 was like, open it up and around and like see what's going on in there. So it wasn't great, and she died from complications of one of those surgeries, unfortunately, when she was pretty young, because she was 40 and I'm 40, so I'm saying that's young to die.
So this is like we're still like mid 1800s, right?
Late 1800s. This whole thing is like
Okay.
the late 1800s. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so surgery is still basically butchery.
Yeah. Like no one's washing their hands. There's, blood everywhere. Yeah, exactly. The guy's probably also a butcher. He like does
Or
that too. It's in the back.
or
Yeah.
our
So
barber.
yeah. Ugh, that sounds like a terrible way to go. So poor thing. But here's the relationship that was doomed to fail. So this is his Oscar Wilde Oscar Wilde's relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas, who goes by Bosie. And Bosie is a nickname he got when he was a kid, and it's from his mom calling him Boise because he was a boy and then turned into like Bosie. And he was like his mom's golden child, which I get because I call Miles my greatest joy, my favorite boy, and like stuff like that all the time. So I get it. That's fair. So in 1891, Wilde meets him, and Boise himself was born in 1870. So time to do some math. When they meet in 1891, Bosie is 21 and Oscar is 37. So this is something that I looked up how to tactfully address because I know that we like those age gaps are a big thing that we talk about a lot. So there's a thing that Wilde talks about, that there's a great love between an older man and a younger man that's like ancient, like Plato and Shakespeare was talking about it. So that's like a big thing that he, talks about love between, different types of people. And so I'm not going to get into that any more than that. It's not illegal, so fine. So the age range,
It feels different for some reason.
I know, I think so too, but I'm like, I don't know why. And
I don't know why either.
it make us assholes? I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not-
So like
maybe it's
I don't know.
it's a male relationship thing, or it could be the time in which the relationship. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
we are assholes.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be that. I really don't know. But that's what it is. What it is. It's not illegal, the age gap, but being gay is illegal at this time. So there's that happening with their relationship. So when they meet, it's very passionate. Bosie introduces him to the idea of rent boys. So like they like, see other people, they like go to sex parties and kind of giving into your kind of sexual desire. And Boisie's from a very posh line of, minor royalty, and his dad's is the Marquess of Queensberry, which is a very fancy name for your dad to have. And his family history includes lots of people dying by suicide and lots of people converting to Catholicism. So they're like not mentally stable in his family. And so right now, Boise is the golden boy around town. Their affair is very passionate. There's lots of love letters and poems. Bosie's a writer as well, but not as good. He's just like a rich guy who's a writer. So he's in there. And it sounds like Oscar was more involved in the relationship, and Bosie loves him, but it's also like never really going to commit to him. Meanwhile, so they kind of live together in like a country house in different places, and Oscar's still married, but he spends all of his time with Bosie, and Bosie's dad, the Marquess of Queensberry, and Marquess is Marquess, which is a British nobleman ranking above an earl and below a duke.
Still don't know what that means. I like how
So
you
dumb.
tried to define it, and it's
I
still
know.
ambiguous.
Whatever. So he's like minor, whatever. And so the Marquess of Queensberry is pissed that he sees his son in this relationship with Oscar Wilde. And he's suspicious that they're more than friends. And he's just like really, really mad. And so he's kind of following his son around, yelling at him, telling him that he cannot be in this relationship. Everyone's denying it and yelling. And then he tries to get into this club to like heckle Oscar Wilde and Bosie because he knows that they're there. And he doesn't get let in, but he leaves a calling card. So like a calling card is like, your name on it, you leave a note or whatever. So this is spelled incorrectly, but he writes on his calling card for Oscar Wilde posing sodomite. So he spelled sodomite wrong, but essentially he's saying like give this to the gay man in there. It's Oscar Wilde, they know he's gay, and giving it to the guards. And instead of Wilde being like, this man is a crazy person, who cares? He sues him for libel. So Oscar Wilde sues his boyfriend's dad for libel for calling him gay publicly. So he really like didn't need to do that, but he like, they ended up going to trial. So it goes to trial on April 3rd, 1895, and he is framed as an older man who grooms younger men. And eventually Wilde drops his libel claim because they're like, what are you talking about? We have all these witnesses. Like so many people know you're gay. So they're
Yeah,
going to like,
it's only libel or slander if it's not true.
right,
So why put
exactly.
yourself out there? That seems like a real
It's a bad move.
yeah, it was a bad move.
Yeah, he didn't need to do that. So he did that, and then he loses all of his money because he has to like pay all these court fees and all these things. And his friends are like, you should leave. Like just leave the UK, leave for a few years, go to Paris, like whatever, like just get out of here for a little bit. But he doesn't want to. He wants to stay. His sons are there. Like he doesn't want to leave yet. And he was like, I've made my bed, like I need to stay here. So now everyone knows that now everyone, not just the people in the know that he is gay. And so he gets charged with gross indecency, which is part of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, which is an act to make further provision for the protection of women and girls, the suppression of brothels, and other purposes. So it's basically like the don't be gay or anything that people would think as, I don't know, sleazy law.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, he's still, he's all his Posh people love him, but they also are the ones who are like making these laws. So it's pretty, hypocritical of them to be like, you're gonna like you have to, be charged for this, even though we like adore you and don't really care. So he does get charged. He's sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. So he goes to like a hard labor prison, and it's awful. And he, goes there, and while he's in prison, his mom passes away, all this sad stuff happens. He's not allowed to write like plays or poetry or anything, but he can write letters. So he writes this like really, really long letter to Bosie called De Profundis, which is from the depths, and it's half a love letter to him and half a letter to the way that he lived his entire life. So it's a little bit of like it's like its own kind of novella, and it's something that gets published after he dies. That's awful, especially going to prison for being gay. Like that's not okay. And even though we had all of that, it is also worth noting that, he inspired people to think differently about love, kind of ongoing. He became kind of a caricature of a gay man, which probably isn't what he wanted, but at least, he's sort of at the forefront of getting it out there at this time.
You know,
And
you know what
you
I
know what
was
I mean?
thinking was, I know that none of this is actually true, but in theory, jail is supposed to be rehabilitative,
Mhm.
right? So was the assumption 2 years is how long it takes to not be gay anymore? Or like was it just supposed to be like a constant recurring theme of just throwing someone in jail for being gay?
Yeah, I don't know if they were like thinking about like conversion therapy. I think they were just like 2 years of hard labor for that. And I don't think there was like a on-staff psychiatrist. I doubt there was a doctor,
Yeah.
like it was just not great. So he does get out of prison, and he goes to Italy and finds Bosie there. They spend a few months together, but Oscar's very weak, and I don't think Bosie wants to deal with it. Like he just doesn't want to take care of him. In the movie, they have a scene even before this where Oscar's like just has the flu, and Bosie doesn't want to take care of him because he's kind of a brat, even though he
He's a
like loves
kid.
him. Yeah, the kid, exactly. So they they break up. Oscar kind of lives in Paris for the rest of his life. He dies on November 30th, 1900, at the age of 46. So he dies of meningitis, and he's buried in Paris. Bosie actually lives until 1945. So he lives for, 45 more years. He converts to Catholicism, gets married, and has a kid. He just kind of sucks. Like I think he's just kind of doing whatever,
Yeah.
you
Can
know.
I
So
can I throw out a casting idea for Bosie?
yeah.
Ryan Felipe.
Yeah, totally. And that, I mean, Ryan Fleetwood looks just like Jude Law in the 90s.
Actually, you're right. They do kind of look the same.
So yes,
Wouldn't have been that big of a difference.
that's exactly right. I think people got them confused all the time. But maybe I know Ryan Felipe and Reese Witherspoon's son is like 20 now. Maybe he can do it
There you go.
if they do it again. And then so that's the sad story. That's Oscar and the man he loved and the man's father who sent him to jail and all these things. Some news: homosexuality was decriminalized in England and Wales in 1967, so no longer legal. And in 2017, Oscar Wilde was among an estimated 50,000 men who were pardoned for homosexual acts that were no longer considered offenses under the Policing and Crime Act of 2017. So they that law essentially put 50,000 men in jail, and 100 years later, they all get pardoned because it's no longer criminal.
You said 67.
Yeah, 1967.
That's yeah. So that's a little bit ahead of the curve. So the
Yeah,
U.S. the Stonewall Uprising happened in 69.
yeah,
It's good for them.
yeah, totally. That's it.
That's it.
That's all I got.
Hey, so question for you.
Hmm.
Having done the research you did and the reading that you did, if you were to point to a specific thing to look at or read or whatever to basically get the condensed version of Oscar Wilde as like a human, as a philosopher, I think maybe even,
Hmm.
what would you point to? I already
I would
know
say,
the story of Dorian Gray. Just curious, like if there's anything else out there.
I mean, I would honestly watch the movie, the Wild movie. It's on Amazon. You can rent it. The one with Jude Law.
Okay.
It's pretty good, and it's Wilde, and I'll put a link in the thing. But I thought I did a great job of sort of
Nice.
just kind of, and Stephen Fry, the actor, did a great job playing him. He really looks like him. You just like kind of get this idea that he's like this like big presence, around town. And did you see the like unfortunate? There are also, in the movie and in real life, there were other men who loved Oscar, like that like Robbie Ross, who would have just been, in love with him his whole life, but he fell for the like golden boy around town, and that was his downfall.
In one of the pictures of them together, it links to an article. It says Lord Alfred Douglas, the man who destroyed Oscar Wilde. So not a good way to be remembered, I guess.
No, he didn't. It was like I don't even know if it was really his fault as much as it was his dad's fault for like bringing it up and like making it a big thing. And they could have just had like a rocky, passionate love affair their whole lives, but it had, unfortunately, they got the court involved. And I don't know why um Oscar Wilde would be like, that's libel. Why would you even like stir
Why
the
would
pot like
you?
that?
Yeah, just let it die. Just
Yeah, just be like, okay, that guy's nuts. He spelled it wrong. Like he doesn't know what he's talking about, and then move on, rather than, going to court and having, maids be like, he's always sneaking dudes up to his room, things like that. You're like, why? Why bring it up? But
apparently, Alfred Douglas was also quote unquote a virulent racist.
oh,
So, amongst other
that
things.
doesn't come up in the movie, but color me surprised because
Yeah.
probably that makes sense.
Um. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm gonna give that movie a whirl. I've always heard the name Oscar Wilde because I consume a lot of the media that he had some influence on. It never got deep into like who he was as a person, but he sounds pretty fascinating as a
Yeah,
philosopher in particular.
yeah, very fun.
Um, so I'm going to segue into the true crime side of the equation for today. Like I said, my drink today is water. It has absolutely nothing to do with the story. It has to do with the fact that I was at a work conference all last week in Florida, and I just needed spend this weekend and the next week
Hydrate.
hydrating.
That's fair.
So that's the idea. So this whole time we've been looking at relationships that were doomed to fail, and knowingly or not, I've kind of couched that, and actually you kind of have too, Taylor, within the framework of romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But there are probably thousands of stories of friendships that were also doomed to fail, friendships
Yeah.
that probably should have been avoided all along. It's funny, as we discuss the premise of the show and how sometimes the universe puts two people together at the exact same time, and then I started researching this particular episode and framed it more as being put together at the exact wrong time, like a pairing that you should have the universe could have avoided and done without.
Yeah. Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting again, like the premise is like a little bit shifty, but it's still kind of like, you really should have put these two together.
Like you said at the beginning, we have it's a very loose premise.
Exactly.
We're just telling stories.
We're easy going over here.
Thanks for coming. Okay.
Yeah. So one thing that I thought of when I was looking into like this thing that I'm going to talk about today was it seems that in non-romantic relationships in particular that end in tragedy, there's at the very least either a power imbalance between the parties or a feedback loop that leads to the tragedy. And a lot of times, a power imbalance with these kinds of friendships are based on one's mental acuity versus the others. As in, I can't remember I should have done the research on this before I started talking. What's the book where the guy hugs the bunny too hard and then the friend?
Oh yeah. It's not Grapes of Wrath? Is it Grapes of Wrath?
No. It's
bunny hug
of Mice and Men.
hug.
Of Mice and Men. Like there's a great example of, two individuals with slightly different mental acuity, and it was obviously due to fail. So like that's what I started thinking about. And when I started going through the research of this, I thought about probably the single most impactful friendship gone wrong from our childhood, Taylor, in real life, not of Mice and Men, but in real life. Can you think of what I'm thinking about? The most impactful one of our generation?
The most impactful friendship of our generation?
Gone wrong.
Gone wrong? Oh my God, I have no idea. Can you give me a hint?
Colorado.
Oh, are you gonna do Columbine?
I'm not doing Columbine, but that's the story that came to mind. So yeah, that's exactly what I thought of when I was thinking about like, man, two people should definitely not have gotten together in any capacity. I thought of Columbine. And yeah, okay, so for those that don't know, Columbine is about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. There were two friends who became acquaintances in high school. And in 1999, they ended up injuring 24 people and killing 13, including later themselves. So total death count was 15. And this is kind of the situation that kicked off mass school shootings in general.
I remember, I'm sorry to interrupt, but no. I was in Reno at like a student council conference, and it was like 500 like good kids, talking about how we get everybody to be involved and whatever. And we had just had like 3 days of like, meeting new people and doing all these things. And I remember getting on the bus to go back to Las Vegas to home and someone telling us that it had happened. And it was just like such a stark contrast to what I had just experienced of like this, like, all the kids trying to like get everybody involved and excited. And then, at the same time, someone was killing people in a school where you are supposed to feel safe, but you don't anymore, obviously. Thank you. Fuck you, America.
So that's actually why I thought it was like, I couched it as the most impactful, because there's certain things that happen in our youth where you're like, I remember where I was. It's like when people talk about where they were when Kennedy was shot. Anyways, but that was kind of my first thought. And it took me back to a particularly awful story I remember reading about like years ago. And I think is still considered obscure in the pantheon of true crime. Like I don't hear this story told very often. It is well, let's get into it. Maybe you already know it.
I'm nervous.
I'm thinking about the Toolbox Killers, Lawrence Whitaker and Roy Norris.
Gross, yes. I know a little bit. I feel like I know enough that kind of makes me want to throw up. So I'm excited.
Okay, so you're a PhD in true crime, so I'm not surprised. I do want to differentiate this from the Toy Box Killer, which sounds delightful by comparison. Like you're forced to be locked in an FAO Schwartz before they kill you. This is not that. This is Toolbox. So
that's not a thing, though.
What with the FAO Schwartz? Why? Because they're bankrupt?
I'm just saying that'd be a weird way to, a weird thing to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Because
That might have to be the reboot of those Saw movies.
oh my
Um,
God.
like I said, like I almost feel like there are some true crime stories that though they're incredibly interesting and compelling are just too much for mainstream consumption and
Yeah.
public appeal. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's essentially this. The Toolbox Killers, like I'm not going to go super into the weeds and details on the gross stuff
Mm-hmm.
because it's just too gross.
Yep.
So noting that at the top.
Totally. And don't, yeah, I mean, I feel like I know some of the gross stuff. I'm sure that you'll talk about some of it as well, but it's gross.
I will go mildly into the.
It's like real bad.
It's
Okay.
real bad. Like I was thinking about like how certain situations have like and certain folks within this genre have an it factor. You know, Bundy being considered normal and good looking, Gacy being a
Mm-hmm.
clown involved in politics, BTK had a normal family. These two are just garbage humans. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they have none of that. If you look at a picture of Lawrence Bittaker in particular, he looks
Look it
like
up.
Pennywise the clown. It's terrifying. Like he's
I'm gonna look it up in an incognito window so it's not like in my search history.
that's a good call. I should have been doing that this whole time.
Oof, yeah.
You see it like his
He does
forehead,
look like Pennywise.
right? His like
I see what you're
chin's
talking
really
about.
like pointy and it's got a huge forehead. Like it's just creepy looking dude.
Yeah.
Let's get into our two main characters and note the red flags along the way. I'll start with what I'm gonna say is the main antagonist of the story, which is Lawrence Bittaker. He actually died fairly recently. He actually died in 2019. So we'll get to how that ended up happening. But Lawrence was born in 1940 to a couple who gave him up to an orphanage. He was adopted as an infant, and his family moved around quite a bit. I don't have the years, but I do know over the course of 17 years, he went from Pennsylvania to Florida to Ohio to California. So setting up roots was obviously a challenge. Like if you're a kid
Yeah.
growing up like that, that's you're gonna have like very shallow human connections because you'll never have the opportunity to build deeper ones, right?
Or I mean, it also depends on who you are. Like my husband, his dad was in the military and he moved around and like he has friends from every place that he lived that he still talks to because his parents are making friends with everybody. And his parents were like made it a mission for them to meet people.
Yeah. If you as a parent understand that you have to make that like a point that your kids are socialized, then I'm sure it's different than if you're this guy.
It doesn't sound like he got this, so
Right.
continue.
Once he turned 17, he seemed like he kind of fell into a life of crime, but they were still kind of cute 1950s crimes. Like he was arrested for auto theft, evading arrest. And I mean, this last one is less Dennis the Menace. There was a hit and run as well.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, that's we don't know if the person died or not, but still. I mean, he got hit by a 1950s car. He probably wasn't doing great. He spent 2 years in a reform school, and he kind of just drifted in and out of different facilities for various different crimes until he was about 21 years old. At 21, Lawrence's mental acuity comes into play. He is said to be manipulative and was found to have an IQ of 138. Do you know what that means, Taylor?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I didn't know what it meant either, for the record.
Okay. It's like my
So,
blood pressure. I'm like, I don't know what that means. You just say numbers at me.
systolic, diabolic. It's like, yeah, just am I gonna
Whatever.
die or not? For context, the IQ classifications, there's like various versions of this, but like just generally speaking, 90 to 109 on an IQ test is average.
Okay.
120 to 129 is considered superior. 130 and above is considered very superior. So, like I said, there's different scoring methodologies for this, but just generally speaking, a quote unquote genius is someone with an IQ of around 140 or so.
Is that true? Like, what if you're a bad test taker? Or what if you're a good test taker? Or
Yeah,
how do they test you?
I don't know how test taking or your ability to be good at I've never taken an IQ test. I don't know if it's like if do you need to know something or is it just like how you logically reach conclusions to things?
Right.
Because I don't think they ask you like who was president in 1912. I think they
Right.
just
There's not like a Kaplan course to study for it.
right.
How
I
do
think
you,
it's
I'm sorry, I'm
no. I
just
want
kind
to
of,
know.
how do you take an IQ test?
They're like, this
This
is
test that IQ, Mensa, the most accurate IQ test. Ooh, is one you can do in 5 minutes. Who knows? There's a
I feel
free
like
IQtest.net.
yeah, I feel like you need to go into a space with people in like lab coats watching you do it for it to be like legit.
So Einstein was 160.
Yeah. So I was gonna bring that up. So for example, again, a genius is somebody with an IQ of around 140 or above. Lawrence was a 138. I looked it up. Elon Musk was a 155, and like you said, Einstein was a 160.
Ugh.
He was closer to Elon Musk than he was to our IQ, for context. I'm a,
Snoop Dogg is 147. Um,
seriously?
yeah, but I don't believe
So
that about
cool.
Elon Musk. I think he made that up.
I mean, I don't know if he.
I
I
want to see
don't
some
know.
receipts for Elon Musk's
I mean, the guy
near Einstein IQ.
started 3 companies and ran
I mean,
them,
kind of. I
and
think it's
and
just,
then spun off the planet with his
I think
ego.
it's just like not having any empathy. Anyway, continue. I'm so sorry.
No.
Well, anyway, let's take IQ tests later. We'll let everybody know
Yeah.
unless they're bad or
Yeah.
wildly different.
And
If
then
one of
nobody
us
will.
is really smart and one of us is not, let's just not share it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's got to be the same.
We will not be sharing our IQs later.
I think if I had to guess, you're probably a 119, which is just shy of superior. It's very average. And I think I'm probably right next to that. Maybe like a 117, 116.
All right, we'll take it.
We'll figure it out
Okay.
and report back, maybe. So I bring all this up because I mentioned that I think he's the main antagonist, and I think being basically a professional criminal with that level of intelligence has to put you in a rare category based on the people you would normally interact with. Let's leave Lawrence there and move on to his partner in crime, Roy Norris. So Roy was 8 years Lawrence's junior. So there you go. There's a little bit of that obvious power imbalance, in addition to the fact that Lawrence was crazy smart and Roy wasn't. There was also the age gap. He ended up in foster homes quite a bit, mostly due to his mom being a drug addict. This guy was kind of fucked from birth, it sounds like. There was a lot of stories around his abuse and what people did to him, and he didn't have an easy life growing up. But again, like also, I was reading it and I was also thinking, like, it's the 50s. Like, how do you interpret that? Like, isn't this standard that your dad comes home and just beats the entire family? Like, I don't.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying, like, did he have it worse than a lot of people, or was his particularly bad? Hard to gauge that, I think.
Yeah, totally.
One thing that was interesting was that at one point in his youth, Roy did try to attempt suicide.
Oh.
Yeah, like he just strikes me as someone, like a kid with no mentors or anyone to look up to. I don't really see him as like an obvious deviant just yet. Like mostly just like a lost kid, you know. I would say that changed the older he got. He, unlike Lawrence, who was like involved in stupid petty theft, like stealing cars and shit, Roy's dabbling in the criminal underworld came about through sexual crimes that he was committing or trying to commit. So around the age of 21, he was caught trying to break into a woman's house for refusing to let him in. It sounded kind of like a date gone wrong. For that, he was arrested. He was diagnosed as having a schizoid personality disorder. Again, not to harp on this too much, but think about that. On the one hand, you have Lawrence, who is basically Beethoven levels of intelligence. Beethoven, I looked it up, was 135 to 140. And on the other hand, you have an obviously mentally ill man in Roy, who's diagnosed as a schizoid personality.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
After Roy's release, he attacks a female student in San Diego, strikes her in the head, and then beats her repeatedly. So his escalation is ramping pretty quickly from trying to break into a woman's house to like this level of aggression and violence. Still, when he's arrested, he goes to the psych ward for mental illness, which I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know how mental illness or the criminal justice system worked in the 1950s and 60s, but this guy's crimes veered so heavily towards sexual violence, and they keep putting him in psych wards.
Yeah. I don't.
Like, is that a mental illness?
Yes, probably in some way, but also is very violent, so you probably shouldn't be around other people. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was thinking, well, it's definitely abhorrent behavior, so maybe that's a signal of mental illness, but definitely put him in jail. He shouldn't be around others, right?
Yeah, definitely shouldn't be around other people.
Staying on brand for Roy, he is eventually released from that situation. And then he rapes a woman in Redondo Beach, which is
Mm.
actually reported to police. And that'll come up again because that is a really, really critical moment in why everything else here happens. It happens. I will say this, like, I am changing, I'm not using the word rape very much deliberately in this because I just don't want to say it like
Hmm.
300 times. So just note that I don't know, I don't get triggered by much, but I did get kind of upset at like how many times this comes up over and over again. And so I
Yeah,
just don't want to do that to you or the listeners or myself again. So I'm just not going to go into detail.
we can
Fair?
assume there was a lot of sexual crime
Yeah, exactly.
happening. Okay.
Exactly. So let's get into the overlap between these two deviants. So how did they come together? So let's going back to Lawrence. In 1974, Lawrence stole a steak. Again, he's kind of Dennis the Menace. Like what a stupid crime. Anyways, so the grocery store employee who was going way above and beyond confronted Lawrence, and Lawrence ended up stabbing the guy.
Oh God, I'll
Guy,
never do that. Let him take it.
take the steak. Like who cares?
Just who cares? Yeah.
The guy lived, but Lawrence was arrested, obviously, and he was sent to a prison in San Luis Obispo. All these places that I'm listing, I'm like, I have so many amazing memories of, and it's so
I
weird
know. Like it's so
couching
beautiful
that.
there.
Redondo Beach is one of my favorite places in the world, and it's just like you think about what was going on with these guys, and it just tints everything in this weird
Mm-hmm.
shade.
Mm-hmm.
And then going back to Roy's rape accusation in Redondo Beach in 1976, he was arrested for that. And then he also landed in San Luis Obispo. So now you have the
Mm-hmm.
two coming together, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
you have the incredibly smart, manipulative Lawrence, the incredibly, mentally ill and sexually violent Roy coming together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I was like, how do you compare this? Like, what is it like with that kind of kismet when two people kind of come together? I thought about like Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, or Jobs and Wozniak. Like that's kind of what this is in like a
Yeah, like,
totally
hey,
opposite way.
think we're gonna change the world. Let's make it worse.
Yeah,
Or let's invent computers or let's be the best. And yeah, totally.
yeah. So the two hung out in like seemingly different crowds. Roy was more with like the hardened criminal types, the biker types, and Lawrence kind of kept to himself and hung out with the older inmates. Not for any, like, it just seems like that's just where he gravitated towards. It wasn't because like he couldn't hang out. Apparently
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence would save Roy multiple times from getting beaten up and jumped. Like he wasn't like soft in any way. Like he just didn't hang out with that crowd. Regardless, they bonded while they were in prison, mostly because of this situation where Lawrence was saving Royce from getting his ass kicked. They bonded and decided to get together once they were released. And what they bonded over, again, it was just gross sexual stuff that I don't need to talk about.
Yeah,
But that was basically it. That's like
great.
they just like were like sharing fantasies with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence ends up getting released in 1978, and then he moves to Los Angeles. And again, given what I said about the guy earlier, like he's doing pretty well for himself. He got like a really, really good job. He was making $1,000 a week in 1978, which
Yeah.
I can't do the conversion, but that sounds like $1 billion in today's money.
I think you're right. I think it's $1 billion.
It's exactly $1 billion. Are you doing the conversion?
Yeah, it's 1978
Yeah,
dollars in 1978 money to today. Oh my God, $4,500.
a week.
Yeah, that's a
That's
lot.
so much money. Yeah, he's crushing it.
Yeah, shit.
Yeah, he was a skilled laborer. He socialized normally, like people knew him. So I didn't write any of this in the outline, but he would like donate to the Salvation Army. He would go buy food and give it out to the homeless people in downtown LA. Like he was being a normal dude, despite the fact that he
Mm-hmm.
looks like Pennywise. Roy's released a few months after this, and he goes right back to being a piece of shit, committing more sexual assaults while living with his mother. For whatever reason, Lawrence writes to Roy, and the two make plans to meet up. And they did. And this is where they start putting together their plan to play out the scenarios they discussed while they were in jail together.
Oof.
They acted like this was like a startup. Like they started like pooling their money together. Like it was, that's why I brought up like the Wozniak Jobs things. I was just like, they had this like light bulb moment, but it was just like so counter good. Like I don't. Yeah, they
Yeah,
pulled money together. They were like buying materials. I'll get into this. Like they like
right. They're like planning to do something like a party, like something fun, but they're planning to commit crimes.
they ended up converting a van. Like they did the van life thing before van life was a thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was. Anyways, we'll go into it. Yeah, they ended up buying a van, obviously, and I started wondering, like, is this where the trope comes from? Like, did these guys
Right.
actually invent that
Did they
trope? And we
invent the
don't know.
van? Yeah.
I don't know, but it had to have been close to the beginning of that, right? I mean, how long have vans even been around?
Totally. That's funny.
So yeah, let's get into what they ended up doing after they put together this, LLC of theirs. I'm joking, there was no LLC, obviously. So they have their
But they're probably on
van.
the road to that.
Yeah, exactly. So they have their van, they have a plan, and they
Teaming.
have each other's support. They start going through with this plan. This all gets, like I said, super gratuitous, and I just don't want to say the word rape 300 times. So I'm
Hmm.
going to gloss over a lot, except one particular murder I will go into the details of. Well, part of the details of. I'm actually not going to go into details of that one either that much. But the overarching premise was the same. They'd see a girl walking on the beach. Like it's just the most like innocent.
Safe place.
How many times? I mean, how many times have you go to Manhattan Beach, you go to Redondo, like it's
Hmm.
just beautiful, and everybody's just having a good time in the sun. It's like the safest place you would hope to be. And anyways, that's what they would do. They'd see a girl walking, always near the beach or on the beach, approach her, tell her they have marijuana or beer, and then they can give her a ride. They abduct her, and they typically drive her up to the San Gabriel Mountains where they do what they do and kill her there. That's
Ugh.
it. That's their entire MO.
Do they always kill them?
No, they didn't. So there was several women or girls who would either get away or they would release for whatever reason.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a little bit. It seems like just something got into them with the ones that they ended up killing, but
Hmm.
none
Hmm.
of them had good experiences. Like none of them were like they got away like not emotionally scarred.
Of
So
course, no. No, of course.
yeah, we'll get into one of those women actually later because she becomes really, really relevant. So the list that I'm going to go off of the ones that we know they killed, there's actually one more that they think they killed because there was pictures of her alive in the San Gabriel Mountains, but these guys never talked about that one, so they don't know what happened to her. So she's just always been missing. Um, the first one was 16-year-old Lynn Schaefer. The second one was 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall. The third and fourth were Jackie Doris Gilliam, who was 15, and Jacqueline Leah Lamp, who was 13. They spent 2 days torturing those two girls. I didn't mention this, but the reason they were called the Toolbox Killers is because the back of the van, like I said, I was going to talk about later, was converted into like a workshop that also had a bed in it. And part of the torture method came from devices they kept in the toolbox. And
Ugh.
like that comes up big time with Jackie and Jacqueline. And it will come up again with the next one. The next one was Shirley Lynette Ledford, who was 16 when she was abducted while hitchhiking home from a Halloween party. Again, the hitchhiking thing, the van, it's just like so, it's like a
I mean, like,
movie.
now, hopefully, we know a little bit better,
Yeah.
but I feel like then this is the story we hear 1,000 times. Like, a woman was hitchhiking, got into a van, and gets murdered. It seems like it happened all the time. And maybe it happened 1% of the time, but
Yeah.
people were doing it all the time, which is really crazy. To think about that was like, oh, I'll just hitchhike home. What?
Yeah, from a Halloween party. When I was living in Hill Country, I would constantly see hitchhikers for whatever reason, and there was a part of me, Taylor, that was like, just stop, like
I
get
know.
the story, like just figure out what is going on, like get the story of what's happening.
And you can get murdered on both sides, picking someone
Yeah,
up and being picked up.
I would be murdered.
Ugh.
I'm definitely on that side of that equation. Shirley is the one that I'll actually talk about because I mean, they're all bad, but it's the worst one. For context, the audio recording of what happened to her is now used by the FBI to desensitize agents.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. We're going to be harping a lot on that audio recording. It is really, really bad.
Did you listen to it?
You can't listen to it. You can't find it, but there's
Oh,
transcripts
good.
of it that are circulating, and there's also like up teen thousand reports of people who actually have listened to it and what the outcomes of them listening to it was. Which again, like that audio recording is going to keep coming up over and over again because
Okay.
it sounds like very very dramatic impacts on everybody who listened to it.
Wow.
So,
Oof.
um, the so like I said, like if you wanted to, you can look up like you can't look up the audio recording, but you can look up the transcript of it. I'll expand on one part of what was happening during the recording that sounds horrible. I think I know what the answer to this is, Taylor. You might actually know what this is because you sort of are familiar with this crime. Do you know what an olecranon is? It's part
Is
of your
it?
anatomy.
Oh, no.
Okay. So it's part of your elbow. So it's this part. I'm pointing. Nobody can see this because it's audio medium.
I
But
mean, it's
like,
an elbow. Point your elbow.
well,
Everybody put your elbows in the air.
so yeah. So
Point to it.
it is the bottom part. It's the part that like is hinged from the forearm that
Huh.
ties to the top, right? So obviously it's a place where a lot of bone comes together, a lot of cartilage comes together.
Is it your
There's
funny bone?
no, your funny bone's above that. Your funny,
Okay.
actually, your funny bone, the top part of your your funny bone is where the top part of your olecranon actually connects to the upper arm.
Okay. I don't know why
Yeah.
this makes me want to throw up, but just like talking about it is making me kind of nauseous. But keep going.
Aren't you glad we're doing this at 8 a.m. your time? Shirley's autopsy revealed that that part of her anatomy was basically sawdust.
Oh my God.
So in the audio recording, the sound of a sledgehammer repeatedly hitting something can be heard. There were 25 distinct sounds of that happening with a ton of screaming and everything else that came with it. And the assumption is that that's where that injury came from. It was one of a lot of injuries, but that's the bulk of what you would hear if you ever were able to hear the audio recording is the sounds. Oh God, it's like, I'm like thinking about it. It's like
Okay.
so awful.
Pause. They recorded it and
Yeah, they
kept it?
recorded it and kept it.
Just the audio or the recorded video?
No, I mean this is 78. There's probably no capacity for video recording in a van, right? So no, it was just
Oh,
audio.
they're in the van.
Yeah.
It seems hard to wield a sledgehammer in a van. Keep
I
going.
mean, they really, I mean, it's why
You have to really want it.
you
Yeah.
don't get in vans.
Don't get in vans. Yeah, totally, 100%.
Yeah, that detail is the only one that I really am gonna discuss because it just shows how terrible and brutal it was. Later on, Roy himself would describe the tape by saying, "If you ever heard that tape, there's just no possible way that you'd not begin crying and trembling. I doubt you could listen to more than 60 seconds of it." But
Oh my
he's
God.
but he's
But he
saying
was
it,
there.
but he's saying it like he's proud of it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like like it wasn't like a oh man, can you believe how crazy this was? Like what a wild Friday that was. Like no, he's kind of like he's bragging about it.
Yeah.
So
Yikes.
one interesting note that might have contributed to why her death was particularly awful is that she was rejected by Lawrence. So she worked at some diner that Lawrence would frequent, and he asked her out, and she said no. And
Oh,
they
no.
actually think that's also why she ended up getting in the van because she was like, "Oh, I know this guy. I see him all the time."
Right.
So there was like a trust element there, but she didn't know that he felt the way he felt towards her. Like what he want, what his intention was, obviously.
Yeah, she didn't expect to get murdered.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should be able to say no to people and not fear for your
Murder.
safety.
Yeah, exactly. So after Shirley's death and her body was discovered, she was the only one whose body was discovered, by the way. Everybody else was like lost in the mountains. Roy, he's a real social butterfly. He rekindled a friendship with another guy he met in jail named Joseph Jackson. And Joseph seemed to have way more humanity in him than Roy himself. Roy went on to tell Joseph what he and Lawrence had been up to. It's like like what are
Just
you
like casually mentioning it, like, oh, what did you do this weekend?
it's just have you ever been cornered by someone who thinks what they're telling you is amazing and you can't get away from them?
Sure.
I'll tell you what. So every
I can't think of a
conference,
specific example, but go
oh,
ahead.
I know exactly what my example is. Every conference I go to, there's some crypto bro who shows up who's going to revolutionize democracy through the
Mhm.
blockchain, and they just find you and start telling you everything about NFTs and crypto and blockchain. You're like, your eyes are just fucking glazing over, and they won't. Every conference,
Oh my
universally
God,
across the board. Yeah, that's my hell. So, please, anybody, just
Crypto bros.
never talk to me about crypto. I don't care. Like, I aged out of it. I think I actually hit that age where
Yeah.
it's like I don't need to learn anything more. Like,
All set.
I don't need Web 3.0. Like, Web 2 is good.
No,
I got it.
I'm
I'm
fine.
golden on that side. So,
Yeah.
anyways, Joseph probably sat there just kind of nodding along to how cool Roy's story was, and then immediately went to the police.
Good on him.
He's the reason all this happened. He's the
Good.
reason why the downfall happened, because the police had no these were all missing people for the most part, except for
Mhm.
the last one, Shirley. And stupidly enough, Roy gave such detail that police were able to triangulate him just from what Joseph reiterated from the stories that he told. For example, he mentioned that one time they had maced a woman while trying to get her into their minivan. And then Joseph recounted that exact story verbatim, and the police looked up there was a report saying, yeah, this woman showed up saying there was a silver minivan, there was two guys in it, and they maced me and tried to drag me into it.
Did Joseph get some sort of Presidential Medal of Honor?
I don't know. I
If
hope he
he's
was at
still
least
alive,
pardoned for
can we
whatever. We
give
don't.
him something?
Yeah, unfortunately, Joseph Jackson's not an easy name to Google.
True.
Yeah,
But
so
man, good for him.
good for him.
That's great.
Yeah, like Roy gave him all the details that he needed to incriminate himself. That story, the one of the maced woman, her name is Robin Robeck, and she reported all this, like I said, to the police, but she just couldn't identify the people at the time, so the case kind of just went away. After
Hmm.
Joseph described what happened, the missing girls, the abductions, the police went back to Robin with photos of Roy and Lawrence, and she immediately identified them. Like, it wasn't like just those two. Obviously, it was like a photo lineup of like a dozen, but she immediately picked out those two.
Wow.
Police are actually doing really good work here. So they're starting to survey Roy, and they saw him dealing marijuana, which was a parole violation for him that he was picked up on. Lawrence was also picked up, but it was more blunt. It was for the assault on Robin.
Hmm.
Police searched searched Lawrence's apartment and Roy's bedroom in his mom's house, and they find basically what you would expect: just tons of photos of victims, of potential victims, of random girls walking down the beach, jewelry of the victims. They also found that audio recording I mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
They said they also found acidic material, which apparently Lawrence intended on using on the next victim. So thank God that stopped.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Roy was having a pretty hard time with this. He was having a hard time with being arrested. He actually waived his Miranda rights just to show how intelligent he is. And then he ultimately confessed to police. His argument being mostly like, hey, it wasn't me, it was Lawrence all along.
Just like
The prisoner's dilemma story, basically,
yeah.
just rehashed in this situation, which again, like I said, I always kind of couch Lawrence as the antagonist, but like he's not like Roy's not like some innocent bystander to any of this stuff.
No, I mean he was there and he didn't tell anyone.
Exactly.
Like the other guy did.
Exactly. And Roy was ultimately given a $10,000 bail, whereas Lawrence was outright denied bail, which I don't even understand why Roy was given that option. Seems incredibly generous.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, again, going for conversion rates, it might have been unattainable amounts of money for him anyways.
That's true.
Roy would eventually testify against Lawrence in return for the prosecution not seeking the death penalty, obviously. Roy ends up getting 45 years to life, and then he became eligible for parole in 2010, but this is later on in his prison life, he didn't actually go to his parole hearing, which deferred it out another 10 years. By the time the next 10 years came, he was dead, so it didn't really matter. Not that he would have gotten released anyways.
Right.
Lawrence is incredible. He just keeps on criming. So he hired two inmates while he was in jail to go kill Robin because they were about to get released soon to prevent her from testifying. So
That isn't that just what Alec Murdoch did too? Or tried to kill someone from jail?
oh man,
It wasn't that part of his story that he tried to hire a hitman to kill someone?
I'm trying to remember. No, it was somebody else who tried to hire someone while in jail to kill the prosecution. It was one of the idiots that I covered. It wasn't the Daybell guy. What was the other oh, it was Drew Peterson.
Was it? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's so ridiculous. That is not
Yeah.
going to work.
It never works.
For our listeners who are incarcerated,
You are constantly surveilled.
there are no hitmen. There are
There's
none.
no hitmen. So obviously he got caught for that. He ended up going to trial for the murders in 1981, having sort of pled guilty. He didn't reply when the judge asked him if he pleads guilty or not. So in that situation, it's just deferred that you're pleading not guilty, and so that's what the judge entered. His defense obviously tried to exclude the audio recording of Shirley's death. And the judge actually told the jury, because they would play this tape in court, they told the jury, for those of you who do not know what hell is like, you will find out. Like, that is the level of insanity that we're talking about. Apparently, when the tape was played, the entire courtroom and observers in the courtroom were reduced to tears, except for Lawrence. And again, I mentioned the impact this tape has had on people. As an aside, one of the main investigators in the crime committed suicide after this trial.
Oh my
And
God.
And he wrote a 10-page suicide note that specifically referenced the tape and the murders as haunting him.
Oh no.
Yeah.
How many murders? How many people did they kill?
It would have been 5.
Ugh. Okay.
Well, it's 5 that we know of because they confessed to it. There's there's another one where the girl is at the dump site in the San Gabriel Mountains with pictures of her there, and they didn't confess to that one. So like, we don't know what happened to this one. She's still missing.
Got it.
Lawrence interestingly took the stand in his own defense, but it seems like that was mostly for his own entertainment value rather than any realistic hope of talking his way out of this. He was obviously found guilty and obviously sentenced to death. Lawrence is just like, when you talk, he's just a piece of work. He continued being a pain in the ass from prison. He was actually declared what's called the vexatious litigant at one point, which I love. Like, that is someone who just will not stop filing frivolous lawsuits for no reason. So like, there was one story about how he filed a frivolous lawsuit because he was served like a broken cookie, and he called that cruel and unusual punishment. Like, he was just
an asshole. Yeah.
pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So like, once you're labeled a vexatious litigant, you have to get permission from a judge or a lawyer to actually submit any more litigation. So like, that's like, his right to file complaints was basically taken away from him
because he was so annoying.
Because he was so annoying. Like I said, like, he ended up dying in 2019. He was 79 years old, which is like a pretty ripe old age. And he was still on death row at the time. Roy also died shortly thereafter. He died in 2020. He was 70. He would have been 71 or 72 at this point, because they have a 7-8 year age gap. And that's kind of it. Like, these were 2 guys who came together, who the universe put together, who, in my mind, I think that Lawrence would have just been a normal dude, probably. Like, his crimes weren't that bad until they met. Like, he was just, and he had a great job. Like, he was doing normal shit, but I don't know. Roy kind of brought the worst out. But also, the reason I placed him as the antagonist is because Roy kind of planted the seeds, and then Lawrence had the intellect to completely run with it. If it wasn't for Lawrence, Roy would have just been like running, just finding women and hitting them over the head with a baseball bat. Like, you know, like, there'd be no like system if it wasn't for Lawrence's abilities. But
right. So like, separately, they might have done other things, but together that was really the thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's awful. It's all around awful. Hate the story. I think, like, again, this is one of those ones that you just don't hear about very often because it's just so bad. And I've literally skipped over like 95% of the details of what happened to these people. And there's a reason for it. If you want to read more, but it's not going to make you feel good.
No, it's going to make you feel terrible. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Those poor babies.
I
I see a picture of the van. Not great. It looks like exactly what you think it would look like.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yuck. It sounds like, also some of the pictures I'm looking at are from like movies about it, from like the 70s and 80s, I guess. It does look very Saw, you know.
Yeah, the stories of what they would do when they got up to the San Gabriel Mountains. Because I've been up there. I mean, you've been up there, right? Like,
I think so.
Yeah, it's not that far from LA. It's desolate. It is desolate.
Mm-hmm.
There's like hundreds of little offshoot roads that you could go
Mm-hmm.
down that would take you places where nobody's ever gonna find you.
Yeah.
And it's just you with these two lunatics in a van that had its entire back stripped out. There's a bed put in there, and it's turned into like a workshop. Like it's just
Yeah.
it is Saw. Like it is as
Yeah.
close to that universe as you can get. And some of the shit they did was just like, yeah.
Do you think they used their tools for like other things?
Yes, I know they did.
Like fixing things?
No, I meant other things like like torturing people.
No, I mean, but like also they're like, oh, I need a screwdriver. And then like would like use it even though they had just like murdered someone with it.
They just take the pieces of hair, then like blood that's on it off, and
Exactly.
then start
And
using.
then like
Yeah,
fix a chair.
yeah. I'm sure. I mean, they seem handy enough to build this mobile kill van.
Ugh. Well, that's
But
terrible.
going back to like the entire premise of like what goes on. I think they tell you this if you do rehab that like you're not supposed to date somebody else in rehab, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there's a underlying component in your brain that's gonna maybe go backwards with each other.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit of that too. Like if you make buddies with somebody while you're incarcerated, you maybe just like, you know what, like leave that relationship where it is while you're
Mm-hmm.
in jail, and then move on with your life and do something different. Like find other people, go to the coffee shop, go to the dog park, and just like socialize with others. I think like
Yeah.
that's kind of the red flag here is like just there's no need to come back together. Like
Yeah. Just
that
like
part of
leave
your
that
life,
behind. Yeah.
yeah, that part of life happened. It must have been magical, but we can leave that in San Luis Obispo's prison when it does
Yeah.
happen.
I feel like that the moment when they're like, oh, you have all these terrible thoughts too. That was like the no turning back point. They're like, oh, I found someone who's just like me in
Yeah, it reminded me of
a
Leonard Lake
way.
and Charles Ng. Like it's just like
Mm-hmm.
just garbage wrapped in skin, just showing up. It's just there's such trash,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they bond over the things that nobody should bond over.
Yeah, totally. So my aunt, who will never listen to this, one time told my mom a story, and I don't have the details, but she said that in San Francisco in the 70s, one of her friends was a gay man, and he was killed by someone who came over and just shot him. And I think it was Charles Ng.
Yeah, I know that story. It was
Yeah.
he was a radio DJ or something, and he put an ad in the paper, and somebody just showed up and shot him and left, and
Yeah. I think
Ing
my aunt knew
confessed
him.
to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's terrible.
Wow, that's crazy.
I know. Wow. Well, that's awful.
Yeah. Do you have any ending banter that you want to go into?
Thank you to everyone who's listening. Please give us reviews. That's super helpful. I made an email address. So I have doomtofailpod@gmail.com if anybody wants to email us about anything. And we're going to work on maybe a newsletter. Just getting it out to more people is going to be really the thing to keep this going. I think that's our next step.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for taking point on that. Obviously, my last 2 weeks have been chaotic. 2 weeks ago, I had no electricity for a week, and then last week I was on the road. So, thanks for taking
Well,
point on that stuff.
yeah, totally. I'm glad you're back. And yeah, everybody watch Wilde, the movie, and there's some Toolbox Killer movies. Maybe watch it, maybe don't.
I'm not watching it,
Yeah, I might not do it. I like the Saw movies, but I like them because they're like ridiculous.
and not 100% accurate in real
Yeah,
to
like they didn't
somebody's
really
life.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, thank you, Taylor. Hopefully, you
Farz?
have a great weekend
Oh, you too.
and safe travels for work the next week or two. And
Thanks.
yeah, I guess I'll see you next week.
Cool.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.